we are talking about an upcoming accountability training being held for municipal bodies and with the Ministry of Local Government. We have with us on set the Mayor of Belize City, Darrell, and we have the CEO in the Ministry of Local Government, Kerry, Belisle. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you again.
So we have been having a continued conversation about the celebration of 1 year, or commemoration, I should say, of 1 year of the signing of the UNCAC. And obviously, this is one activity meant to fit within that commemoration. Let's talk a bit about how municipal bodies and the Ministry of Local Government see yourselves in this process.
Well, one of the things with the training and with the 1 year anniversary is we feel that local government is very important. Local government actually delivers most of the direct services that people expect: garbage, street repairs, sanitation services, other very direct services, traffic management, urban planning, building permits. So that we are saying that because it's an important part of government, it's very necessary for us to fit within the conversation and the dialogue. And this is within a larger context in relation to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the important aspects of that is how do you transform all levels of government into effective vehicles for development. And a big part of that conversation is the discussion on accountability. You're seeing this in the United States right now with a series of public figures and members of Congress who have been they're raising allegations of sexual impropriety. You're seeing this with allegations in terms of Zimbabwe and the former president of Zimbabwe who recently resigned. So this is a global discussion, and we want to localize it within Belize. It's oftentimes felt that local government is a lesser form of government, that if you want something to get done, you have to go to the central government. But really and truly, you have a lot of local government practitioners, and the idea is how do we properly capacitate them with awareness, with skills, with abilities, so that they can more effectively deliver on core commitments for the betterment of people within our various communities throughout Belize.
Now, as you pointed out, this will be a training that will include technical staff and elected officials. And I think that's extremely important in terms of continuity and ensuring that whatever happens following the next elections, that the core values that are being instilled can still carry on. And one can say that very much the administrative staff, the people who stay around when elected officials are voted in or out, are really the ones who should be able to maintain or can be able to maintain accountability practices. Let's talk about where training for this particular field comes in and how this will reinforce what they already know.
Yes. One of the things, the ministry, besides its role as a monitoring body, has the responsibility to build capacity at the municipal level. And while we have actually implemented a series of policies and even legislative changes, you might be aware of the building legislation, the trade license legislation that we've been working on to improve. But it's also important to recognize that local governments collectively are responsible for about $130 million annually. And that is sometimes a number that escapes a lot of people, so that the services that are provided by municipalities really have a lot of impact. Now, this kind of training will reinforce what we believe are the legislative amendments that have been made, in addition to some of the policies that we're putting in place. But more importantly, I think it will help the senior staff, especially, not just the elected officials of the ministry, but the senior staff, to appreciate that for those legislative reforms that are being put in place, and for those policies that we're working on, it requires a certain leadership structure, and they are part of that leadership. So it's not just to look at the political element of the leadership structure, but also the technical element, and also understanding what is corruption, understanding what are the mechanisms that are out there to address corruption, because these are things that we may take for granted that are known, but we think that the training will reinforce the policy adjustment, the policies that are being put in place and the legal reforms that are underway. And so, we think that is where the continuity and the longevity will perhaps reside.
You've also made the decision to include some other offices as well. We know the Auditor General and Integrity Commission will be a part of this. Okay.
Yeah, well, the training encapsulates a series of presentations and discussions with elected and technical staff. So we're going to have presentations from the representatives from the Integrity Commission, and they're going to speak about the obligation of elected officials regarding their disclosure, code of conduct, and what they must do to comply with the requirements of integrity as set out by that legislation. I know that there was a lot of fervor about that around 1 year ago. One of the things that we need to do is that we need to have adequate follow-up to ensure that current elected officials have complied with their legal requirements. We're also going to have presentations. Much has been made about the Auditor General's report in relation to immigration, but in relation to audit and the scope of the Auditor General's powers in terms of tendering and so forth. How do you deal with public accounts and spending and expenditure? The Ministry of Local Government always talks about the budget process and that you have to stick with your budget and so forth. We're also going to have a presentation from the Ombudsman so that he's going to talk about how do you deal with citizens' concerns and how do you address that aspect of responsiveness. One of the things that people always complain about the City Council is you write us a letter, you don't get a response. So that the Ombudsman is going to speak about, well, how can you be more effective in relation to basic things like customer service? We actually engage a lot with members of the public, and part of accountability and trust is that they feel the public feels that government is responsive, that when you address a complaint, it's going to be dealt with. And then we're also going to do some internal training so that Ms. Margaret McKenzie, who is the former Chief Magistrate, who is our legal counsel, will be able to do presentation on the various legislation that governs local government. And we're also going to have a presentation from Clifford King in the ministry itself to talk about our reporting requirements to the Ministry of Local Government. So it's rather comprehensive, and one of the good things, it's the first time that all sectors of local government are coming together. So we have 9 mayors, but we also have over 300 villages. We also have quite a lot of alcaldes who form part of the local government cadre, and we're going to look overall too of the importance of reform. I think in cities and towns, local government is very strong because you have staff. But in villages where people are struggling for a budget and they're struggling to be able to be more effective, how do we actually work together as local government to strengthen local government over the entire country? Because one of the things that I want to really mention as a theme, when we talk about accountability, we tend to look at it very negative. We're talking about anti-corruption. We're talking about an elected official who steals, and how do we punish them, or technical staff who does that. But really accountability has to do with the overall performance of government, and it's really a leadership question. Are we being effective in relation to our core commitments? Are we reducing poverty? Are we improving the quality of life of residents? And this is something that elected officials and senior staff should carry with them all throughout their tenure, because it doesn't only have to do with arresting people or carrying out audits. It has to do with how effective you are at the leadership function.
One criticism that I always hear from, let me not call it a criticism, a comment then, that I always hear from my peers is that, especially last week, we've become a signatory, we've signed on to UNCAC, but how long will it be before we start to see some kind of improvement? So you have all these trainings, but where do you hope that these trainings will take us in maybe the next year and a half?
Well, I think that first and foremost, and this is one of the things with this particular training exercise, that it's going to raise public awareness. I think a big part of this, and we've mentioned this, I know Kerry has chimed in, I have chimed in, that a big part of it also is on the public. I think that this is one of the reasons why we're doing the morning talk shows. This is why the UNCAC representatives are doing the talk shows as well, so that we can raise this as a political value, that really the responsibility is on the electorate to ensure that they vote for people who can implement positive change within the country. We've talked about it quite extensively, I think from the entire time since I have been in office, which is about 6 years. And I believe that we've talked about it before, and I believe that many years going into the future. But if we want change, I think the public really has to take responsibility. There has to be a lot of political education and awareness on the value of the vote and holding elected officials accountable. One of the things we're very grateful for is the media, that the media in Belize really are check and balance on governmental authority. But after, when the media's attention has passed, many issues which should continue in terms of public attention just die off. One of the things that is raised very quickly is how the UNCAC addresses systemic issues. so that you actually talk about things like creating a merit-based public service. And I think we've oftentimes talked about reforming the public service. We've never implemented it, and that's something that's very, very necessary. Reform of political parties, reform of the tendering procedures, ensuring that campaign finance is something that's addressed. So that I think unless we consistently discuss these things, even if we only talk, but if we consistently discuss these things, then I think change is going to happen.
Also, we should add that a lot of the legislative changes that have occurred have been to improve the transparency of some of the laws, so that the average everyday citizen can not only understand, but also to be able to see what they should expect out of some of the services delivered by municipalities. So that when you think about the budget of a municipality, and when you think about the development plans for a city, really there's a lot of responsibility at the municipal level to shape what a city looks like and what it grows into. And so that the first matter is making sure the laws were right. Secondly, you make sure that it is sufficiently transparent that the everyday citizen should then feel that there is economic value in making sure that my money is spent properly. And I think that if we then look at the whole matter of proper use of public resources, then you'd appreciate that the public should want then to be part of the conversation. So we're hoping that with this series of improvements, not only at the law level, but also for the municipal bodies to understand the importance and responsibility of their role, that the citizen would then feel that they have something to gain from this, and they would then place the kinds of demands that I think I would speak to at the poll or wherever that may be. So we think that is the kind of environment that we're moving towards, and so that in terms of what the UNCAC represents is ultimately we would want to believe is it would represent a more informed citizen, a citizen that demands more, and a body that understands its responsibility in the economic growth of these municipalities at the local government level, at the very least.
You know, it's interesting because I think when it comes to public perception, we hear the words accountability and transparency and many other of elements of good governance from our courtship phase with government officials in their campaign period to long after. But I feel that these words have somehow lost their value to people. There is a mistrust that exists, and it no longer carries any weight. So my question to you is, what is your perception of an accountable, transparent municipal body or local government within a particular area? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I think I just wanted to give a quick comment. It's ironic that these words, and I agree with you that they seem to be buzzwords. I looked at campaign flyers and it's accountable, transparent. I mean, where's the depth in terms of that? That notwithstanding, I think this question is the key question for the development of Belize, because I think many of our problems and our challenges and our underdevelopment, so to speak, is as a result of our failure to get the leadership and accountability question right. So notwithstanding the fact that many elected officials, including myself, oftentimes pay lip service to accountability, is very, very critical. When we talk about the sustainable development goals and creating a quality living environment for residents, accountability is very much at the very top of one of the things that a municipal government would want to achieve. So that what I mean by an accountable entity is a municipal government that's delivering on what the law says that they should do. So that the law says that the Belize City Council is responsible for the good governance and rule of Belize City. So that Belize City as a council, we should be managing the city in terms of ensuring the overall growth and development of the city. That is leadership in the widest context, so that we're building roads, we would be ensuring that there is efficient management of whatever resources, there is efficient also the aspect to ensure that we are according with financial policies, there's no scandal, there's no corruption and so forth. But an accountable government is a government that is delivering on core commitments in relation to what the law says it should be doing, and also that we are being responsive to the public. Part of it also too is you would see that Ministry of Local Government, through several of the different projects, has required municipal governments to do certain things. We passed regulation to create a public service of the municipality. That's part of accountability. There's now in law the requirement that every 2 months all municipal bodies have to have a public meeting. You have to actually go out and consult with members of the public. We've done that quite extensively in Belize City. That's part of accountability. You can speak to the fact that you have built a certain amount of concrete roads and you're talking about projects and so forth. That's part of accountability because it means that the local government is part of the development conversation, and I can go to my local government and I can say, I want this and I expect that it will happen. So that I think by and large there has been a fair amount of trust in local government, but we're nowhere near where we need to be in relation to meeting our targets with accountability.
I think Mayor just captured a lot of what the responsibility of the ministry for oversight, for monitoring, for technical capacity building means that we now have a circumstance where all municipalities across the country have a development plan. You have municipalities that have a series of policies in place. You have legislative amendments that have been done. And what that means is that the foundation for which you can hold a municipality responsible has been set. Now, the capacity building and this kind of training informs you as to what you asked a very pertinent question: what is accountability and transparency? What does it mean to be in a public office and to deliver services to the public? This kind of training informs and educates so that at the end of the day, and I think that the point about the public consultation is a very critical one, because those consultations, we have a representative from the ministry that attends those meetings and takes minutes of those meetings, and that is record. So that where a municipality has a plan, where there are laws in place, and where there is an open forum for asking questions and to follow up on what has been done, there is a clear mechanism in place for you to be involved. And that is where the ministry's role resides, to be able to make sure that you have the mechanisms in place. Now, for an everyday citizen or for any involved person to attend, to ask questions and to involve themselves in the process is something that we think has to be at the public level as well.
Yeah, but let me take this a step further. The UNCAC, and I think we all celebrated when we signed on to the UNCAC, it allows for legislative policy changes. It allows for possibility of, we all look forward to the recovery of assets that can be allowed for, the strengthening of bodies and allowing for autonomy. But ultimately, what the UNCAC allows for a country to be able to enjoy when fully implemented is really what elected officials and government bodies are mandated to do anyway. So my question to you is, if these are already, if you are to have a transparent system in place, if you are supposed to train elected officials, and of course we know the public service has their role as well, to execute the use of public funds and make decisions on our behalf in the most responsible manner, then why are we in this position where we need to be moving towards more accountability training?
Well, I think that when you talk about the creation of accountability, you have to kind of recognize that that is the creation of a system and also a culture. So that accountability, for one, will come about if you have strong leadership. But even the perfect system, for example, I am very much knowledgeable about the American system of government. I very much respect their multiple layers of checks and balances, but they likewise have weaknesses. So that when
and no country is immune to corruption.
No country. So I think that within that context, an ongoing dialogue on this issue is very, very important, because we must recognize that even after UNCAC, even with the drafting of perfect legislation, those still depend on people and implementation. So that you want to really engender in your leaders a culture of accountability. And you want people to recognize that you can hold them accountable at the polls, and by attending public meetings, by raising it in the media, by bringing judicial review claims. So they're actually, I feel in Belize, we don't need UNCAC, because you have the laws in place. What you want is that you want there to be the
you want
activism.
us to adhere to it.
Yeah, you want there to be the activism on the level of the public, and then you want the elected official to comply. And if they don't comply, you have clear procedures in place where they will be held accountable. You either go to jail, or you're fined, or you have certain kinds of mechanisms. The problem that I think that we have in Belize is that there's not that level of political activism or political culture in place that we actually hold our elected officials to bear. I remember that on another media entity, this was raised that we replaced our colonial government for a term in law which says the minister may, so that we actually give significant power to elected officials, to the cabinet, to government. And actually all of this is part of the system of accountability. How do we create appropriate checks and balances? You mentioned a good word, autonomy. The municipal government has a great degree of autonomy. If you create more autonomous bodies within local government, then those bodies can actually act as a check and balance on parts of the central government, especially in circumstances where you have the central government and the local government from a different political party, and the central government in some ways can hold back in terms of financial support. All of that is part of ensuring that you create a system that has more opportunities for the effective performance of the governmental function.
I mean, I think that we recognize and we appreciate at the ministry level that getting to where we want to get, however that may be defined, is a process. Yeah. And what we have embarked on is what we think are the right steps to getting where we'd want to get in terms of the ideal environment. So I think that even though we would easily admit that there's a lot to be done at the local government level in terms of improving governance, what we wanted to make sure was that the understanding of where responsibility lie was more broad-based. It's easy to look at, for instance, central government and not look at the other areas of government. So what this training does is send a clear signal to local government actors that you are also responsible, because it's easy to believe that, like Mayor said, that it's just central government. No, we're saying that it starts, and I mean, this may be a stretch in saying this, but perhaps maybe future leaders will come from that local government movement. So it is perhaps important at this point in time to set the foundation early on as to what the requirements are, that we do have a process, there is a way how things are to be done, are not to be done. You will have the presence of people from the Integrity Commission, from UNCAC itself, from the Auditor General's office. So you do have mechanisms that will make sure that you're doing things right. And we think that is the right step in terms of where we'd want to reach.
Is the Public Service Union involved?
No, this is only local government.
Okay, sorry.
But one of the things that I wanted to add very quickly is, and this is on the idea of training, that I have been mayor for going on to 6 years. And over the 6 years, no, I have never attended any training on ethics. You've attended training on bonds.
But isn't local government supposed to train you when you come into office? And
there's a training on the legislation.
Ethics is included in that, I hope.
It's
Please add that, Mr. Belisle.
I don't want to
because this may be the fundamental. I'm kidding.
No. But the point that I want to make, and I remember too, Marlene, if I can say this, when you were younger, you used to participate a lot in leadership training activities. I remember when I was going to school, I used to participate in student government. I get a sense now that we're not doing that to the level that we need to. So that Kerry mentioned a good point that a lot of people come to government through local government. And if we can have an ongoing and sustained discussion on ethics and good government and leadership and training and so forth, even before people get into politics, if we can take this conversation into schools, this is what our government should do and what it should look like, then I think that is part of the answer, because it has a lot to do with our culture, it has a lot to do with our perceptions and the reality of politics, and how we see ourselves as being an appropriate check and balance in terms of when we vote, we make sure that we vote for the correct things and we engage in a dialogue about issues.
Yeah. A very important part of being able to change the culture, to have that paradigm shift, is really building the understanding of the wider public. And I think with all representatives who've spoken about this issue, this is a very important foundation in being able to move forward. It's so interesting when you speak to people who have entered the political arena and they speak of their resistance to following the status quo. In other words, they don't want to pay for votes. They don't want to pay light bills. They don't want to do X, Y, Z. And they almost feel that they're doomed from the start if they maintain a bit of integrity. So my question to you is, if there is a shift, if there are people who are better trained to be able to execute these practices properly, how do we, in your mind, and you've been through the campaign process, you perhaps know the strange requests that come in, how do we shift that to the electorate level?
Well, I think a big part of it is like what we're doing, awareness, so that people recognize that if you want better government, you have to vote for it. And government is not there to meet your individual needs. Government doesn't exist to pay a light bill or to pay this or to pay that. Government is in place to put in place a structure and a series of programs that build the overall improvement of the government. You're responsible for policies and legislation. And I think that people have a expectation that is wrong in relation to what they require of their politicians, because in election time you call it silly season, because people are out there, they're doing this, they're doing that. I noticed that recently over the last maybe couple months, a lot of people now are at the steps of the city council's door, and that's not healthy government. Healthy government is that I should expect my leader to build streets, build parks, ensure that traffic is managed, ensure garbage. So I should know what local government should do in terms of their core commitments, and I should hold those people accountable for. One of the things I always mention is when you listen to discussions, not on this show, because I find that you raise a very positive level of discourse and discussions, but oftentimes our political discussion is vote for me because I want teeth. That's the extent of our discussion. So that it has to be about, okay, then what can we do in relation to overall macro policies? What can we do in terms of a economic development strategy? What do we have to offer? And you question people and you hold them accountable. Things like debates. This is a thing that I know that many quarters of the media, so that you can actually espouse manifesto.
Most political candidates opt not to participate in
and yet
debates.
we still vote. And yet we still, so that if you have a situation where if you don't attend a debate, you won't get my vote, then I guarantee you that in the next go round, everybody will attend the debate. If you have a situation where people have to put out manifestos, but you're required to stick with your manifesto so that outlines a series of programs that I can hold you on. I remember, and I would say this with the UDP, I remember in 2008, there was discussion, and it was in the manifesto, about an unjust enrichment legislation. We're in government now for 10 years. Where is that? If that's in legislation, we must be able to say at the end of the day, we want to see these things realized. Because
it'll be hard to prove now with only 1 year of declaration of assets, you know. but I mean, these are and I say jokingly, but what I'm saying is when these decisions are made, there is a larger impact that's oftentimes we miss in being able to understand. And I am I obviously we have to start somewhere, and I think whether legislation is created or whether some of the requirements are enforced, we have to be able to start. And I'm hoping that with your accountability training and with the establishment of the Integrity Commission and the rollout of the PAC at this point, that we start to see some of these changes that are necessary. Let me bring this back to something important, because your accountability training also includes the staff, right? So it's the people who are elected, it's the staff that will work with them. If we look back on what is happening in the Senate inquiry, we know that in certain situations, the staff knows what their requirements are, but there is heavy political pressure. There's pressure from whoever is in authority to move away from what they are required to do. How do you, in your training, reinforce the employees of these different entities to know that no matter what any elected official comes and tells them they must do, they have a code of ethics, they have a code of conduct, they have a terms of reference, and that's what they must stick to? How do we get there?
Just maybe to make the distinction between the political element in the local government movement and the professional staff.
Yeah.
we actually have in place a policy, and it's something that we have to advance across all municipalities uniformly to have greater protection for your employment. Because at the end of the day, I can sit here and speak to changing a political culture. That is mayor's ambit. But what we recognize is that the municipal governance structure requires the political element, and then there is the professional staff of the councils. So that to the extent that we are ensuring that that staff is trained so that you're competent at what you do, that you are informed as to your rights and responsibilities as an employee, and that you're also aware of the consequences of your actions, we think then we are providing the best fit for the political element to interact with the professional element of the councils. That, in our view, also lends to the kind of ongoing, well, you'd want to say sustainability. That also lends a sustainability element, because we would want to have a professional staff that retains its place. So the best insulation really from where we stand as a local government is to execute on our function, to train, to monitor, to oversee, to correct laws where we see issues, and to make sure that there's a sufficient public discussion at the political level, and that would be with the councillors. I think, Mayor, maybe you can speak to.
Well, I think a lot of it, you mentioned this point that I think this was about a year and a half ago that we implemented the municipal services regulation. And one of the things with that is that created tenured municipal staff, so that when you are hired at the municipality, you actually have tenure. You will work up until your retirement, unless you're fired for cause. Previously, it used to be that I could fire you at will. So that actually creates a level of status of municipal workers, so that you can implement policy based on what the council directs, but you are not micromanaged. We always mention this idea at City Council that the mayor and the council deals with strategic development, we deal with vision setting, but the city administrator and the staff, it's almost 500 people, they're the ones who implement the day-to-day functions. And as long as you have that clear separation, you'll be able to get a little bit of the politics out of the professional staff. I think a big problem that is a challenge both to central government and to local government is this exact thing, the level of political involvement in the public service. And there should be a clear divide by law. I remember that previously when we had the system of permanent secretaries, and this was something that was discussed, that when you have that person there who is actually an entrenched public officer who has served there for 30 years, that person then can act as a counterbalance. When the political person comes in, they come in for a temporary period, they leave, but you also have that institutional strength there. One of the things that I will say about City Council is that I came into City Council and I met a city administrator there, and I will leave City Council and I leave that same person there. So when a new mayor comes in, they have a staff and an institutional training and an experience that could guide them in relation to what they must do from a political level. But I think with the legislation, with the training, with everything, you'll have that balance. But it comes back ultimately to leadership, because they always say that good men and women make good laws, but good laws do not make good men and women. So that you actually it comes back to leadership. And if you have people who are properly capacitated, they're best able to implement good legislation.
And you've spoken a lot about citizens feeling a part of it. How is it then that you go about developing that trust with the citizenry? Because, and I'm not just speaking from a millennial point of view, I'm sure that a lot of people are very skeptical, and you hear that these trainings are occurring and there's a lot of talk about it, but when does that translate into real life?
You know, I think that that's a powerful question, because where there's skepticism, corruption thrives. Because when particularly young people will say that, you know what, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to, you actually leave a very powerful part of the operation of a society to politicians. So actually it is the mice guarding the cheese. And what we are saying is that if we can raise this level of dialogue, we can raise this level of engagement. This is why we have very active public meetings and so forth on a variety of issues so that members of the public can appreciate that really this is about you. This is about your community. This is about your education, your housing. This is about street improvements. This is about the overall growth and development of Belize. And there is no question that you should not be more informed about and active about than what your government is doing, because they're making decisions that affect you and that affect your great-grandchildren 100 years into the future. And that level of dialogue is something that we should always, if only we speak about it, we should always speak about it, because it's a very important question. And I think that it's twofold, that the elected officials must engage and we must bring it to the people. But also, I'm always a little bit perturbed by hearing this comment that, well, I don't feel engaged, I don't, as a young person. It's not my responsibility to make you engage. If you don't want to engage, I just tell you, you know what, politicians are doing what they want.
And sometimes I don't really think it's that, you know, we're not engaged. It has a lot to do with sometimes fearing victimization, because you ask a question and you might upset the wrong person and you can't get a scholarship. You know, so there are a lot of different areas that you have to look at when you do want to question your leaders.
But I'd say in terms of engagement of young people, sometime early about last year, we had a countrywide tour. The Minister of Local Government was in several municipalities raising awareness about our child advisory bodies. That is a program along with UNICEF. And it's a program across all municipalities that engages young people, 15, 16, 17 in that age group, to not only be involved in the everyday affairs of their community, but to actually sit in the rooms with the mayors, with the councillors, and to speak to what kind of parks and playgrounds and what kind of community they want. That program also, we have made outreach in terms of the municipalities. Those programs involve parents as well, so that there are structured programs in the municipalities supported by local government and by UNICEF that seek to engage children, well, young people, I'd say maybe 15 and well, so yeah, I'm just saying, you know, being careful.
They don't want to believe it.
Yes, good. So you know, at the municipal level, that kind of engagement is actually structured. It's built in, and I think Mayor now is right in saying that outreach can be made, those programs can be in place, and but then now the culture has to start to gradually shift to feeling that you're a part of it. Yes, you're a part of it.
Yeah, you know, and you actually mentioned a good point in terms of people feeling victimized, that they could question their leader. I think actually accountability will be reached when, and it's actually something that's qualitative. It's going to be reached when, as the elected official, I actually feel in fear of the public, because that's how it should be. People always say, Mayor, sometimes you're always on TV. I'm always on TV because that's my job. My job is always to answer questions. And anybody who asks a question,
even if we don't like the answer,
you have to respond. You have to respond. And even if you don't like the question too, because that's part of ensuring that you are delivering a responsive and accountable government service, that the media plays a responsibility, and everything must be transparent in the point that people can see and they can be made aware of what's going on, and that they're part of the decision-making process.
So let's talk about the training itself and how we move all these ideas and all these concepts into tangible results within the different municipalities.
Well, I mean, of course, the training...
I know it's not the solve-all for everything.
No. The training is tomorrow, and I just wanted to mention this, that it's the first time, and I think we need to devote a lot of attention to like villages and rural government, because half of our population live in villages or rural communities. I shouldn't even call them, because Ladyville is like a city itself, but it's still considered a rural community. And the leadership of those communities still are, I think, to a great extent, under-resourced. And so it's the first time that we're actually bringing all of local government under one umbrella, the ministry, the mayors, technical staff, villages, and alcaldes, together to have actually a sustained discussion on this is what is expected of us as leaders. And it's very comprehensive in terms of the areas of that the training touches. And part of it is, especially going into a municipal election, part of it is to ensure that the technical staff does know that after that election comes in March of next year, is really the responsibility of the technical staff to ensure that the policies are implemented according to law. I mean, you have a lot of allegations and things like that of corruption, but for every act of corruption, there's a check that's signed. There's a process that gets in place, and that's the responsibility of technical staff. So if we have a properly insulated, capacitated, and aware technical staff, I think that's part of the solution.
I think it's very important to us to have this kind of a venue, because while we spend on training annually, there's clearly an imbalance in the level of skill sets across municipalities. So you have some municipalities are smaller; they don't have the same level of training, but they don't have the staff levels, and so that sitting in the same room with colleagues who have the same kinds of responsibilities that you have, I think will open their eyes to a different kind of an environment.